Hello, I'm Norman Robinson, and welcome to NOLA Crime Crisis, a show developed to open the dialogue amongst city leaders, executives, and business owners to discuss the crime currently plaguing our city. On today's show, we would like to welcome an esteemed guest to our panel, the first ever elected female sheriff in Orleans Parish, the Honorable Sheriff Susan Hutson. Sheriff, thank you for joining us on our NOLA Crime Crisis shows.
Thank you for having me.
It was good to have you here. We've been looking forward to having this discussion.
Yeah, an important one.
Yeah, no doubt about it. First, I want to congratulate you on the successful plan you came up with to involve outside law enforcement
Yes.
into the city to help out with our carnival and Mardi Gras festivity. How did you accomplish that?
Well, you know, it was a community effort. I'm a big believer in community leadership. That's one of the principles I ran for Sheriff on. And that was a big part of what happened here. We had the carnival cruise, we had business owners wanting to see us successful in big Mardi Gras. We had the people in the streets wanting their roots returned back to normal so that they could be in their neighborhoods, going by Children's Hospital or going by, senior homes, whatever it was. So our community wanted to bring that back, and they reached out and asked for help. And then I turned around and reached out to my fellow sheriffs and to other chiefs in the area. And we sat down and worked with the city on a game plan to staff each location, to distribute folks, to keep people safe. So it was a community effort.
You know, we don't normally work well across parish lines. You do realize that historically we haven't worked well across parish lines.
Well, I think it came in that I had no experience, right? So I didn't bring any of that to heart. I knew we needed help, and I knew as a sheriff, one of the first things I signed when I got into office was a mutual aid agreement, and that's with all the sheriffs in the state. And so there's the task force where we deal with major disasters, but then there's mutual aid where we agree to help each other where we can. And so so I knew that I had some help there. And so, so I leaned on it.
Who was the first sheriff that you contacted to test your idea?
Joseph LaPinto in Jefferson Parish. I started with all our surrounding neighbors. So we started right there. They were already helping. They already helped with parades and had been here for years. And so they were able to send a little more after we asked for help. And Sheriff LaPinto was a part of the planning strategies with NOPD because he had been here before, and he's bringing a crew so they could pick their own, spots where they'd worked before, and then we could redistribute everybody else. So he was a big part of that.
So obviously, with the success of this, people are now wondering, what else can we do to stave off the criminal element that seems to be pestering everybody and causing a whole bunch of anxiety. We took our cameras to the street. We'd like to do that doing these shows, just to sample the opinion of people, and to set the tone for our discussion. I'd like to play one of those interviews for you.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of issues going on. I think mental health is probably addressed better than substance abuse, but where we really, it's really programs for these youth, because I don't think necessarily incarcerating them and sticking them in jails and penalizing them as adults is going to be the answer. That's just going to turn them into hardened criminals. So I really believe there do need to be programs to deal with this youth, get them off the streets, get them involved. There's way too much free time, and needless to say, it's been proven every time. When there's so much free time on their hands, they're going to get into trouble. So, I mean, I think there need to be programs to keep them busy, build in them a sense of accomplishment, educate them, and train them that, crime is not the answer.
After listening to that, what is your assessment of what's going on with our crime problem?
Well, he talked about a number of things that were really important here. Mental health and addiction. And trauma is the third leg of the stool that causes the jail to fill up. Over 55% of our residents in the jail, I don't call them inmates anymore, I call them residents, over 55% are on our mental health docket and taking mental health medicine. So I'm the second largest provider of mental health in the state, second only to the state's penal system. That's how we treat mental health. And we know that's not right. I've heard people, and this young man mentioned it as well, We decimated all the mental health facilities under a prior governor. So we've known that. It's been 20 years now. It's time to bring it back. And building a mental health jail is not going to bring it back for the majority of people who need help. And I've had a loved one that I've had to deal with. And one of the reasons I got into this race, knowing about how we treat mental health and needing to be a leader in fixing that, comes from my own family. I had my baby brother came back from the Navy. PTSD was diagnosed. Depending on where we live, there are services or not. Texas, no. California, yes. New Orleans, no. We have to do better. We have to do better. Just like we came together, over 20 agencies, over 200 outside officers, 100 from us, and then all of NOPD. We came together to put together Mardi Gras with the crews, the city, those who clean up everything. We put it on. We got to come together on this issue.
So how do you extrapolate what you did in bringing together these various agencies to get us safely through Carnival and Mardi Gras, to get us safely through the issue of dealing with people with mental health issues?
We got to sit down. Everybody has to be at the table, and we haven't really done that. So there are some different task forces that kind of split up, but we're not getting to the heart of crime and the causes of crime, the sources of crime. I was at City Council criminal justice meeting a few weeks ago. They were putting all of the arrests up on the board. Over, I'd say 60% of those were economic crimes. That tells you something right there. And then you also have, and economic crimes can be part of addiction as well. So we know addiction is a huge issue. That's all around our country. Opioids just went off on our country. So we know that we have to deal with these issues. We can deal with them in a jail, or we can deal with them being part of our society, coming back into our communities and into our families, and that takes us all.
What do you say to, I guess, critics or detractors who look at your progressive approach as simply coddling the criminal element? They don't really cotton to the idea that these people are sick. Their attitude is that these people are just bad.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the proof in the pudding is in the eating, right? We've got a mental health docket that is overseen by a federal judge who has ordered us to do certain things. We have Tulane certified psychiatrists here doing work. So it's real. It's real, and trauma is real. There's a shooting, it seems like, every day. The kids that went through Katrina, right? They're coming of age now. And there was a documentary about that recently, Katrina babies. Mental health is real. Everybody knows that. Everybody has somebody in their family who is dealing with mental health issues. It's real. So we've got to deal with it. I see it every day in that jail. And what we want to do is prevent there being victims of crime. You know, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office also has victim services unit. So when people become victims of crime, we help them get funding from the state, reparations, counseling. So we see the other side of it as well. We service both those who are in custody and those who are victims of crime. And sometimes they're one and the same.
So what I hear you saying is that we're not going to solve this problem unless we tackle the mental health aspect of it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. The mental health, the trauma, and the addiction.
Is that where we start?
That's where we start at. And we start at services. So right now, when people come to the jail, they leave without a safety net. You're going to go right back to doing that, whatever you were doing previously. And I want to give a little more context to that. I hear when I walk in the streets, I hear New Orleanians who are from New Orleans say there's a culture.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a familial issue as well. A young man was killed at Walmart a couple of weeks ago. That young man had been in our custody just 3 weeks before that.
Really?
Yeah. Not only had he been in our custody, his family members, he had 2 sisters in our custody as well. The young man alleged to have killed him is in our custody. He has a family member also in our custody. So if you are leaving our jail back to a familial situation where going to jail is something that happens, what chance do you really have? So if we really want to work on this, we've got to get to those root causes, the economic conditions, the trauma, making sure that education is taken care of. Can I give you one more story?
You can. I mean, we have 24 minutes. You can give me as many stories as you can think of.
Well, because I see this every day in my jail.
Yeah.
Young man, 20 years old. He is a father. 2 times. He's been a father twice now. One of his children is 5 years old.
What?
Yeah. And he is an 18-month-old. He is in the Travis Hill School. He is just now getting his education in jail.
So we're talking about a systemic problem that goes all the way back to the family.
All the way
go back. It goes to the homes of where these children are coming from, and they're being raised by people who've been traumatized or who are suffering from the same kind of dysfunction
And
that's causing their problem.
Sorry, no.
Go ahead.
But we've also treated the criminal justice system, right? We've allowed it to funnel people into the system. And real talk, they look like us. And that's been the history in this country. We have to recognize that first. And people say, I just want to open the doors and let people out. That's not true.
When you say they look like us, and that's been the history of this country, what do you mean by that?
Criminalizing being black, basically.
Okay.
Right? Stop and frisk. We go into a neighborhood, we have zero tolerance for what's going on in these neighborhoods, which are primarily black, and then we start getting you into the system. We start with tickets, and then you don't pay your tickets because you don't make enough money. We're going to lock you up, and we lock you up, you lose your job, and now you have a record, you can't get certain jobs that'll put you in a higher economic stratosphere. So that's been going on forever, and so we want to stop doing that. We want to. There are criminal gangs out here doing stuff. Let's use intelligence. When government agencies use intelligent information about what's going on, members in our community will tell us what's happening, and then we take it from there, right?
And you say use intelligence.
Yeah, that's right.
As opposed to what?
As opposed to stop and frisk.
Okay.
That is a big waste of time, because one of the things we know, people are saying, well, let's stop and frisk. The numbers have been the same forever. It's 10 or less % of those stops actually find something. So like a gun or some major issue. Most of the time you're giving out tickets and things that hurt people economically. So we just don't want to do that anymore. We want to, when these task forces come together, you got the federal government, federal law enforcement agencies, and you're looking at the people who are hurting members of our community. I have room in that jail for people who hurt our community.
So what you're saying
Absolutely.
is that there is an element out there
That's right.
whose primary objective is to do harm.
Is to do harm.
And we probably know who they are.
We know who they are.
But but why aren't we doing enough about the issue of taking action and doing something about it?
Well, it's a whole system. When I was police monitor, we would meet with victims of crime, primarily mothers who've had a young son killed. And inevitably, the people who were alleged to have killed their son were also alleged to have killed others. So they've been out in the street. So what are we doing to make sure that we're, number one, making sure that witnesses can come forward? Because primarily it's witness testimony that helps with that. You've got some DNA if you can find a gun, etc. But everybody thinks it's like CSI, where you just find all that and then test it and wow, we got them. And it's not like that. Most of the time it is witnesses. Who's going to come forward when you are surrounded by people who make you unsafe? So we've got to make that system safe for witnesses and victims to be able to come forward. So it takes all of us. It takes all of us to be able to do that. The police, of course, have to do their job. The courts have to do their job. The district attorney has to do their job. The public defender, their job. So we all have to do that well to uphold rights, but target those who are actually hurting our community.
Well, what about the possibility of, or since we know who the bad actors are, what about the possibility of cross-parish cooperation?
Yeah.
I mean, around the metro.
And we do that. There are a number of task forces that we're working. There's the U.S. Marshals. There's one in Gretna about drugs. And the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office has deputies in those task forces. So we assist with NOPD as well with that, because out on the streets, you got all these gangs and they have beefs and all that going on. Once they're arrested, they're in this jail, which is much smaller, and the beefs are still there. So we collect information on phone calls. We collect information through other intelligence measures in the jail, so we can help deal with finding out who's associated together, who could be part of these criminal enterprises, and we got to share that information.
So since all of those systems are there, What's stopping them from becoming more effective? Is it the funding?
We are, it's a good time to talk about where we're at. We are at less than 60% staffing.
Less than 60%?
Less than 60%. We've gone from about 45, 50, up to around 55% right now. That's really tough for all the work that the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office does. If we don't staff the courts, the criminal justice system doesn't run. The civil justice system doesn't run. All of the courts we staff security at. If we don't hold dangerous people in this jail, they won't see justice. If we don't provide reparations to victims, they won't see justice. So we serve this community in so many ways, but our people are getting tired, right? When you only have 55%, that's a lot of work for everybody. So, and if you just turn around and look at it, we run a mini city over there, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to do all that, and I just want to give a lot of love to my team. We stepped up from Mardi Gras. We're doing these jobs at just 55%. But we never, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office was kind of a side note. You know, NOPD was the focus,
Sure.
but not realizing how important these folks are. And we have to take better care of them.
I've often wondered why the Sheriff's Department hasn't had a bigger role in law enforcement,
Right.
because it's odd that the Sheriff's Department in Orleans Parish is different from the Sheriff's Department
Everywhere
in
else.
any other place in the state and any other place in the country.
That's right. Yeah, I wasn't here for that history.
What's going on with that, and what can you do to kind of move it away from that?
Well, you're right. I just came back from a meeting of the Louisiana Sheriff's Association, and the 63 other sheriffs in the state collect taxes. They're the primary law enforcement agency in the streets patrolling, and so they have a lot of autonomy over what they do. Here we've got this hybrid where we staff the jail and the courts, but NOPD is the primary patrolling agency. There's no reason that we wouldn't be able to help and supplement that when we're able to bring our team up to the same level that NOPD is at. So for instance, when I got here, we had deputies making $15 per hour. Now, I'm not going to ask a deputy to go patrol the streets where people are shooting at $15 an hour. I shouldn't even ask them to staff the jail at that. And so it's very important that we get that raised. But I'm moving forward trying to get a millage in April, because I have to have a pay plan to keep people. I can keep people, bringing people in, but if they don't have a career track, we can't do that. Mm-hmm. And the city did this about 9-10 years ago, if you recall. When under Mayor Landrieu, when they came in, they had a big budget deficit that they had to deal with, but they also had to pay their employees better. So they started a pay plan to make sure that they could do, take better care of them. And we have to do the same so that we can plan, have certainty in our budget, and be a very well-run organization.
So is our problem just that those things that we need to have done are just not being funded properly?
I believe so. I want to go back to, I was looking at the murder stats that were in the paper this morning, and I believe it was 2018-19, we were down to like 110, or below 150. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was an initiative under the Landrieu administration and going into the Cantrell administration of looking at those, targeting those people who are most at risk of being killed and at risk of killing somebody. And so we paid attention to that. There were safety nets. We're dealing with folks. We're dealing with the root causes. And it plummeted. The murder rate plummeted. So I don't know why we got away from that, or if anything changed on that. I would love to see more about that and go back to looking at that. We can be a big part of that. We're holding folks right there. We can access them. We give people school right now. We're providing we're opening back up to provide programs for them, religious, educational, and we hope to bring jobs into that as well. So if we put this plan together, and if we can as the city fund it, I think we can get back down.
When you say if we can put this plan together, who is we?
All of us. So it starts with our community, though.
All right.
The programs itself. So for instance, we get help from Voice of the Experience. They have all been system involved or incarcerated to come talk to our residents about, number one, what you're doing, how you're living your life, how you can be better, how you can not continue to be system involved, and also to bring down the temperature in that jail. As you can imagine, we have close to 900 men crammed in there together. That's volatile. And younger men, right? So that can be very volatile. So we have our community to help us with programs to deal with violence in the jail and to deal with these members of our community when they come home back to our communities. And let me tell you, when I walk the streets during this campaign, they all live right next to us, everywhere next to us. These are our neighbors.
What kind of conversations did you have with them when you were walking the streets?
Oh man, they wanted to tell me about a number of things. They didn't like the food, they didn't like the treatment, they thought it was dangerous. All things that we know because it's under a consent judgment. But I also want to say, as a city, we have not properly funded it. And we have to do that. We have to do that. The answers are sitting right there. We're going to have all the structures in place to comply with this consent judgment, but we have to have the bodies in place. And to have those bodies in place, we have to have a pay plan.
Let's talk about the business and civic efforts to resolve crime. It has been my observation that many of those organizations are preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
They're not talking to the people who need to be targeted. I don't see any of the young African American males involved in this this coalition that's being formed to resolve crime. They're spending money on other things. They're not spending money on communication. How important do you think that is, that we start speaking a language speaking in a language that these children can understand, and that they feel like they have some stake in the outcome of what happens?
Well, you know, this generation is very different, right?
They are.
Very different. They question everything. It's a different language than what we use, but they're the same as us. In that you need credible messengers to come deliver those messages. And that's not going to be the business council. That's not going to be me, right? That's why we're dealing with Voice and other members of the community to give those messages out. The credible messengers have to be a part of that. Now, earlier last year, I saw that there was some meeting of business people. I saw Norris Henderson and some of those, who's over Voice of the executive director of Voice of the Experience. So a broad coalition. It's very much necessary. We got to treat the trauma too, right? So we don't just talk to them, you got to treat it. These kids have no hope. They've seen loved ones killed right next to them.
Yeah.
Family members, and
so how do you reach those kids? The kids that don't have any hope, how do you reach them?
There's some groups going on in our community. We have to make sure that we get everybody in these groups to talk about it, but there's something called strategic intercept mapping. And at every step of the way, you plot out, how do people end up in the system, right? How do they end up being perpetrators of a crime? How do they end up creating a victim of a crime? And you start looking at how they get into those systems. And economic crimes, right? That's jobs and education. So we deal with our school board to help with that. We deal with our business council to make sure people have jobs to go to, training with our business community as well. So we come together to meet those needs. We need to assess them. People can be assessed in a number of ways. Unfortunately, one of them is when you get into the criminal justice system. The judge can order some. We can have some in our jail. So if we can look at what people's needs are, then we can meet those needs.
Last question. I know you mentioned that we have to come together and we have to solve this mental health problem. Do we have a criminal justice problem that we need to come together on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to be able to come together to do these things. So there are a number of task forces or meetings that go on every quarter or monthly. I don't know that we have the trust that we need amongst each other to come to the table and be real about what our issues are. So there's a finite amount of money, and if somebody gets it, then somebody else gets less. We need to prioritize how we build this map out. And if we could agree on doing that and then stick to it so that people eventually do get what they need in the system, it would meet our needs as well.
You used two words that I'm very curious about. Come together and be real. What do you mean by that?
right? So we got some side of the community saying we're coddling criminals. We got the other side saying that's not true. We're trying to treat root causes of crime. So then when you have those kind of attitudes, people don't understand exactly what you're trying to do. All I'm trying to do is prevent future victims and prevent people from getting mental health treatment in the jail. They should be getting it in their community. So once we sit down and actually flesh out these issues and people can understand each other better, then you got a chance to reach some common ground.
Well, hopefully at some point we can start looking at this thing as a system-wide problem and stop being selfish about protecting our little fiefdoms and territories and kingdoms.
Kingdoms, yes.
And start thinking about, the community as a whole.
Our community. Can you beat this community? I rode a horse in Mardi Gras and just saw it from a whole different perspective.
Well, there's no place like New Orleans.
No place like
My
New
wife and I went to Mobile for doing the Mardi Gras weekend, and I said, I can't live any other place.
Where?
I can't live any other place. I'm a New Orleanian. I can't live any other place. That's it.
The best city ever.
The best city is ever. So we need to work to make things better. All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We would like to, again, thank Sheriff Hutson and you, the viewer, as well, for joining us on today's program. We will return next month with more city leaders, executives, and protectors of this city committed to make a positive difference in our community. I'm Norman Robinson, and we'll see you next time on NOLA Crime Crisis. Be well.